Hello, everyone. Welcome to our conference on human rights. This is Human Rights in Venezuela, the facts. Thank you all very much for coming. We really appreciate it. This is an initiative by VCI. You'll hear more about them later. Just very quickly to run through the registration. You guys, or the agenda, apologies. You've already registered, so we're just going to have a welcome, some information about Facebook. Then we're going to have opening remarks from Natasha Soto, who's a VCI member. She's going to talk about the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. And then we're going to have our first speaker. We will then have a Q&A. The Q&As, if you could please write your questions on the papers that are on your seats and then hand them to a VCI member. They're at the sides here, so just if you look around, they'll be wearing the T-shirts. We will then get through as many questions as possible, but there's only 10 minutes, so we'll have to just get through what we can. We'll then have a video on the human rights situation in Venezuela, our second speaker, another Q&A, so perhaps keep your papers for the one you're more interested in. The first one's going to be about the humanitarian crisis building up to the current protests, and then the second is during the protest, the humanitarian crisis during it. Finally, we'll have closing remarks from Angelisa Zerpa, who will sort of summarize the event and also bring a bit of hope back into the situation. So it's not all negative, and we do have positive remarks to make. So just first of all, please like to give a big welcome to Rebecca, who's the main organizer of this event from a Facebook perspective. So everyone welcome Rebecca. Thank you.
Hi, guys. I just wanted to welcome you all here on behalf of Facebook. I'm sure some of you have been here before. Maybe this is your first time. I think it's great that we can utilize our event space and our facilities for something like this, something so worthwhile, and that we really need to get the information out to the people and out to the world. Part of Facebook's mission is to give people the power to build community and to bring the world closer together, and this ties in so perfectly with that mission and that statement, and that we are really, really proud to be behind the guys in this initiative, and I really hope you all enjoy the event. Sorry, that's my job as well. So I'm going to introduce our SMB director here. Her name is Sochi Balzola, if I'm getting that right. Sochi, apologies if I'm not. So Sochi was born in Venezuela, and she's just going to speak to you about the impact that has had on her life and also the importance of this initiative to her.
Thank you. I grew up in Venezuela. I am a Caraqueña. Grew up in Caracas, Venezuela. Venezuela, the country I grew up, is a country that had or has the biggest waterfall in the world, Ollantaytambo. It has beautiful coral reefs, Los Roques. It has and had the most beautiful women in Venezuela. It was a paradise. It was a promised land. It was and is still a land of biggest richness in the world, the biggest natural resources ever. The land of our fathers and our grandfathers. My dad always said that in Venezuela, Sochi, you cannot die of hunger. Because he said, in Venezuela is so rich and the climate is so perfect that you just sit below a tree, a mata, like we call it, and you just shake it, and you'll either have a mango or a coco or a mamon, which is a small fruit we have in Venezuela, and you cannot die of hunger. My dad was wrong. Today, children are dying of hunger. Over 1 million people, including myself, have left Venezuela. Not because we wanted. We didn't have a choice. My brother is still there, still holding to the dream and hoping it will get better. Venezuela today is ruled by hate. It's ruled by dividing people. I remember that in Venezuela, every New Year's Eve is more important for us than Christmas, because in New Year's Eve, you're born again. And no matter how much money you had, you danced in the streets because you were going to be born again on the 1st of January. There is no way today to be born again. There is no way, because the joy that we have all as Venezuela, and trust me, we were born with the biggest joy in the world, is partly gone. And that is why it's so important that you're doing this today. It's important because we need to try to bring back the Venezuela we grew up in. I grew up in. Not for us, but for our children. My daughters always ask, Mama, when are we going to Venezuela? And I say, we're not. We are not until it's safe. So my brother comes and brings some Venezuela back to us and brings on the 31st of December the tradition that we're born again. Let's make sure that the work that you're doing today will sooner or later enable us to be born again on the 31st of December. Maybe not this year, maybe next year, but soon, so that we at least can go visit and bring back that joy that we had. It is incredibly important not to forget what's happening in Venezuela. 83 people have died as of yesterday. 83 young children that were fighting because they didn't want to leave Venezuela, like my brother. And maybe if a lot of us do this, if a lot of us bring attention to what's happening, maybe somebody will do something on it, and they will rescue our country, and they will bring back, I say, one of the most awesome countries there is in the world, because we have, and we still have, the natural richness, but we had the richness of the people, of us, and we were one. No matter how much money you had, we used to be one. And so let's not forget this. When we look at all these things, the human rights violations, let's try to understand maybe. Let's try to understand maybe where Chavismo came from. Let's try to forgive. Let's try to forget. Let's try to heal. And let's try to change. Because the more we hate, the more they win. And the more our country will be suppressed and will never come back from what it used to be. So viva Venezuela, and whatever you see, remember the country we all grew up in and we all love. Gracias.
I think we can all agree that those were some very powerful remarks from Sochi. Very, very grateful you spoke. Thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce Natasha Soto, who's a VCI member, and she's going to speak about, give an introductory analysis.
Hello, everyone. My name is Natasha Soto. I'm a Venezuelan community in Ireland member. VCI is a small non-profit, volunteer-led, small organization that, so we have had a few helping hands along the way to make this event possible. So I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to all the people who helped us to be here tonight. And on behalf of all of the Venezuelan community in Ireland, I want to say special thank yous to Facebook and to Rebecca Rowden for making this event possible, for having us here today and allowing us to share with you some insight on the humanitarian crisis and the human rights violations in the country. We will also be forever grateful with Maria Corina Muscus and Francisco Marquez who open up their space in their agendas to share with you and with all of us tonight their knowledge and expertise in this area. I would, of course, like to thank you all very much for joining us here tonight. This is the first time that VCI has ever tried something like this, and I'm delighted that all of you have joined us tonight. We may be a small organization, and we may have only been around for a couple of months, but I think we punch or try to punch above our weight, and that is because we have the most amazing, committed, and hardworking members that try to make events like tonight's possible. And I think that's just an example of who Venezuelans are. To all of the VCI members, I also say thank you. I think I could go on all night just saying thank you to everyone who has helped us, but I promise not to take much more time of take much more time of what we have, because we have two amazing speakers who are going to talk about the humanitarian crisis and the human rights violations in Venezuela. But I want to tell you a little bit about VCI. So VCI was created with the mission of integrating the Venezuelan community living in Ireland into the Irish society, and to promote the Venezuelan culture, customs, and values in the country, while at the same time raising awareness of the situation in Venezuela and trying to support our fellow Venezuelans living under vulnerable conditions back in the country. And due to the lack of fact-based information about Venezuela available in Ireland, and following these objectives that we have as an organization, we decided to organize this conference. With tonight's conference, we aim three things. The first thing that we aim is to provide information about the current humanitarian crisis in Venezuela from a human rights perspective. So we don't want to politicize this event, because everyone who is suffering in Venezuela are just human beings. Everyone who dies in Venezuela are just human beings. The second aim is to raise awareness about the human rights violation and the humanitarian crisis. And finally, what we want to try is to highlight ways to help Venezuela and Venezuelans. And all that is left for me to say now is, please enjoy the evening, if that is even the correct word for it. We'll be here for tonight. If you have any questions about VCI, about our work and what we want to do, or if you have any questions at all about Venezuela or Venezuelans, please join us after the conference has finished. Ask any of the VCI members your questions, or even tell us, keep going, because we need that kind of support. I will leave you now with a short introductory video about the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela that was made by Human Rights Watch. Thank you.
No tenemos ni para el almuerzo y para los niños. Y bueno, hay que sobrevivir. Y enseñarles a ellos a decir, no hay. Y eso a mí me da dolor.
Hay que darle una lista con yelcos, con soluciones, con compresas, con antibióticos, con analgésicos, con las toallas clínicas, con sábanas, con lo más mínimo, porque lo único que le presta la institución de salud es la cama, el colchón y la presencia del cuerpo médico y el cuerpo de enfermería.
Quedan varias farmacias cerca y por lo menos 4 o 5 veces a la semana voy a farmacias diferentes a ver. Pero la misma gente me dice, no, nada que llega, nada que llega, nada que llega.
Estamos manifestando por comida, luz, agua, por todo lo que necesitamos aquí. Pues hubo un policía que fue el que me golpeó a mí, diciendo que agarran a todas esas malditas perras sidosas y las montan, que nos las vamos a llevar.
No hay crisis humanitaria, no la hay, lo afirmo con total responsabilidad, no la hay.
Nosotros tenemos problemas acá, pero esto no es para nada una crisis humanitaria.
Mientras ellos se mantienen en una posición de negarlo todo, mucha gente está muriendo, mucha gente está padeciendo.
Okay, so I forgot to give Natasha's introduction, so just apologies for that. She's just completing a Master's in International Human Rights Law in Griffith College, and works in an NGO here in Dublin, so she's very interested in this topic. So Natasha, thank you. Just moving on to our first speaker, I'm going to introduce Maria Corina Muscus, but first let me just tell you a little bit about her before we speak to her. Maria Corina Muscus holds a master's degree in international legal studies at American University Washington College of Law. She specialized in human rights and gender. She's currently working as a Romulo Gallegos Fellow at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. As a master's student at WCL, she worked with the Anti-Torture Initiative and the Center for Human Rights and Humanitarian Law as a research assistant for Professor Juan E. Mendez. She worked on the issues of Haitian immigrants and Dominicans of Haitian descent, rights to nationality in the Dominican Republic at the Center for Justice and International Law. In Venezuela, she worked at a law firm where she prepared documents that supported litigation process before the UN Human Rights Committee and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. She was also a professor of the Human Rights Law Clinic at the Universidad Católica Andrés Bello, where she graduated from law school. As a professor, she developed strategies for addressing human rights abuses in Venezuela. She is committed to work as a human rights lawyer specializing in issues of women and gender equality in Venezuela and the Americas. So if everyone could give a warm welcome to Maria Corina Muscus Toro. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here and demonstrating your interest in Venezuela and the topics that today we will discuss. I also want to thank the members of the Venezuelan community in Ireland for the invitation, also Facebook. I am very aware of the work that the Venezuelan community in Ireland has put on this event, and my special thanks to Giovanna, Angelisa, and Nat. So next slide, please. I want to put you in context of what's going on in Venezuela on a very general basis before we discuss the particular health and food crisis. I also want to warn you that there is nothing glad or happy in what I am about to tell you today. Venezuela is currently facing a political, economic, and humanitarian crisis. Since April, hundreds of protesters have demonstrated their disagreement to Nicolás Maduro, current president. There have been around 33 protests every day, according to the NGO Observatorio Venezolano de Violencia y Conflictividad Social. The scarcity of food and medicines and the social and economical rights have been the main reason of protest. There have been around 90 deaths that occurred during protests. More than thousands of people have been detainees, and some have suffered from injuries as a consequence of police brutality. Nevertheless, there's a very deep and worrying humanitarian crisis in terms of health and food, and the international community must pay close attention. Next slide, please. First, it is important to understand that the Venezuelan state is obliged to provide health to their citizens in accordance to our constitution. The Constitution established that the state must guarantee a specific budget that will cover for the objective of healthcare policy. However, our budget is the lowest in the Americas. And why I'm starting with this point? It's because there is a straightforward responsibility of the state with regards to the current health and food crisis. Next slide, please. So, a very general overview of the current issues that I will talk to you about. We have inflation. It's more than 700%, and they estimate that this year inflation will get onto 1,000. We have scarcity of food and medicines, and we have also poverty. 82% of the households live in poverty. The Venezuelan government have downplayed the severity of this crisis. The position of the government have been to deny the crisis nationally and in international forums. And they have a tendency of not providing official information, even though that the States is the only one that can give a full and complete disclosure of the current crisis using their institutions. Next slide. So let's start with the scarcity of food. What are the causes of the current scarcity of food? First, we have regulation of prices. Regulation of prices include a price regulated for bread, for contraceptive, for medicines, for toilet papers, among all the products that people buy have a price control. I also talked to you about inflation. Then we have that the basic food basket costs 16 times the minimum wage. And also the drop of the oil prices that have prevented the government of fulfilling their social policies. Next slide. Now, what are the consequences of the scarcity of food? Studies conducted by various universities in Venezuela in 2015 had found out the following. 87% of the population had difficulty of purchasing food. There are long lines to buy food that can extend for more than 5 hours or even a day. 12% of the population are eating 2 or few meals a day. Today I read that 95% of the Venezuelan population do not buy what they should eat. Then, in 2016, we have another research that said that adults have lost 8.6 kilograms over a year for the lack of food. Next slide. We have 1 out of 10 families that are eating from the garbage, and this is increasing over the days. Pregnant women, as the one that you see in the picture, are struggling to eat well, including taking their medicines or folic acid, factors that affect the health of the child. They have registered, some NGOs have registered around 160 riots, and these mean that 600 stores are affected. 45% of them are not opening again. That means more crisis, more scarcity. Scarcity also affects prisoners. An NGO, Observatorio Venezolano de Prisiones, have documented at least 10 detainees that have died from malnutrition. The budget that the government has for each detainee is less than a cent a day, less than a cent in a US dollar. Besides inflation, poverty, next slide please, and the lack of access to food, I want to talk to you about a particular group in situation of vulnerability. Those are children. What can we say about malnutrition in children? Next slide. In 2016, 40 children have died from malnutrition. Caritas have conducted a research study in 4 states of Venezuela, and this is the report. More than 11% of children are suffering from severe, acute, or chronic malnutrition. There is a high risk that malnutrition will all become chronic malnutrition. In 2 particular states, the situation is dramatic, as children are presenting symptoms of severe malnutrition, and they have also delayed infantile growth. Malnutrition even occurs in the womb of the mother. This year, around 35 children have died between January and May. Next slide. Also, we have consequences. What are the consequences of those children in Venezuela that are not receiving enough food because there's no food? What are the consequences of that? According to Caritas, next slide, please. There is a vicious cycle between malnutrition and sickness. Malnutrition predisposes children to irreversible health consequences. We have risk that those children do not progress and do not complete school. We have risk of a fragmentation of the family structure, also social tension and violence. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about the health. They are all intertwined and connected. Nevertheless, I want to talk to you about the very specific case of health. And before we start to talk about health, I want to read you the meaning of health in accordance to the World Health Organization. That is a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease of infirmity. Next slide, please. So A network of medical residents working in public hospital have reported severe shortages, around 76% of basic medicine. Next slide, please. And when I talk to you about the shortage of basic medicines, I mean there are no aspirins in the drugstores, no contraceptive, no ibuprofen, no antibiotic, or no anti-allergic. So if you go to the drugstore, you will not find all of these basic medicines. Doctors tend to prescribe around 5 medicines related to see what the patient can find. So what about the specific conditions in public hospital? And I must say that 90% of the entities in the countries in charge of providing health are public hospitals. So the public hospital encompass 90% of the healthcare system in Venezuela. We have 70% of shortages of basic medical and surgical supplies, 80% scarcity of medicine, 50% of staff reductions, 60% of suspension of diagnostic facilities. Public hospital does not provide food to their patients. The hospital does not provide meals. So mothers or families or parents have to bring food to their children or mothers that recently gave birth. Provea have registered, another NGO in Venezuela, have registered 3,000 of reports of deficiencies in the health system since 2015. And what have the state done about this? Well, first, the Minister of Health have shortened the list of medicines that are basic for health conditions. Then the Venezuelan Institute of Social Services, that is the only entity authorized to provide medicines for transplanted patients or cancer, are not providing them. So the state needs to import those medicines. If not, there are no medicines. Next slide, please. We have patients at a particular risk. Patients are not receiving their medication. We have patients with hemophilia, leukemia, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson, Alzheimer, breast cancer, and other forms of cancer. Since 9 months ago, all those patients have not received their medicines. What about people living with transplanted organs? Well, there is lack of immunosuppressor, and they have a risk of rejection of their organs, as there are no medicines. So we have around 3,000 persons with transplanted organs in Venezuela that are at risk of losing their organs, and as a consequence, they might die. Also, Parkinson patients have not access to medicines. Around 750 persons that need daily peritoneal dialysis to be alive do not receive the treatment and are at risk of losing their lives. Elderly people are also at risk. They just need pills for diabetic or hypertension, and they can't find it. Next slide, please. And also I want to talk about the particular situation of persons with HIV. There are more than 700,000 persons at risk. There are no retroviral medication since 9 months ago. The patients with HIV are spreading the virus to their sex partners because there's also a scarcity of condoms in the country. And there are no HIV tests available in the public system. So we have a very difficult situation with persons with HIV. Next slide, please. We also have waterborne diseases. We have malaria, dengue, Zika, and chikungunya. And the Venezuelan Institute of Social Security, that is the only agency in the whole country with capacity of conducting the reactive and figuring out between the waterborne disease, between malaria, dengue, Zika, does not perform their work because there are no reactive in the country. There are, of course, sanitary conditions and waterborne diseases. We also have terrible conditions with regards to lack of access to water and electricity. Around 45 areas in the country, rural areas, can spend days without water or electricity. Next slide, please. Let's talk about other persons in particular vulnerabilities, infants and women. The particular situation of women and children is alarming. Country's babies are dying at a higher rate than Syria. Official infant mortality, next slide please, have increased 30% over the last year. This means 11,000 of children of less than a year died in 2016. Maternal mortality also increased. Next slide, please. In 65%. This means 750 women that died in 2016. And it is important to mention that we have in Venezuela 19% of pregnant women are adolescents. This is higher than in the whole Americas. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk today about the very particular case of the JM de los Rios. And as you say, there's a testimony there. It says, my 5-year-old son is scared of doing the dialysis, says the mother of a patient. There is no difference between the particular situation of Venezuela and the public hospital JM de los Rios. That is a public hospital that treats children with particular diseases and conditions. The budget have reduced 80%. In 2008, the budget of the hospital was $300,000 US. Now in 2016, the budget is $40,000. Children inside of the hospital do not receive adequate food in terms of quality and quantity in accordance to their age. There are no substitute of breast milk or formula, so the mothers and families have decided to feed their children with regular milk. The Ministry of Health, that's the one responsible of supplying their medicines and food, do not comply with their obligation. There are 15 children in the area of nephrology that are infected, and they do not have medical supplies, or they don't have antibiotic to eliminate this infection. Until today, 2 children have died in this public hospital because of the lack of antibiotic, and the other children and the other families are scared that they will suffer the same path. Next slide, please. The particular situation of women. Among the 82% of the household that live in poverty, I must say that 100 men live in poverty in Venezuela, but 112 women live in poverty. We have shortages in contraception. The shortage reached 90%. 1 of 5 women between the ages of 15 and 19 did not have access to contraceptive methods. If you go to a drugstore in Venezuela, you cannot find a contraceptive for women. What about the Zika virus and how it affects women's health and reproductive rights? We have 61% of cases confirmed of microcephalia associated with the virus, and there is no state policy, no answer from the government about what are the policies, what are they going to do with the crisis, what are they intend to do with those women and those children that have microcephalia. I must say that in Venezuela, abortion is prohibited, and it's only allowed in the case that there's a risk of the mother's life. HIVs. There is a high percentage of children that are getting the HIV with the case of child transmission. Only 27% of the seropositive mothers have access to retrovirals. 21% of those babies are getting the infection when they are born. Only 11% of those babies have the test within the next 2 months. What about cancer and breast cancer? In 2013, breast cancer became the first oncological cause of death of women. We have 6 daily deaths. Women can wait around 2 years for a surgery. And there are not enough mammograms or ultrasounds, and the ones that are available are low quality and do not work. Next slide, please. The situation in Maternidad Concepción Palacio, other public hospital that is apparently in charge of women's health. The hospital is working less than 50% of the capacity. They have lack of medicines as the other public hospital, lack of personal, basic equipment, problem with the lack of water or electricity, problem with incubators. And there are more than 2 or 3 babies that have put in the same incubator because they lack of them. Next slide, please. So, of course, what I have told you have caused certain consequences in the country. Next slide, please. We have immigration. They have registered around 2 million of Venezuela that have left the countries. There are also hundreds of Venezuelans that cross the borders to Colombia and to Brazil to have access to food and medicines. What about education? We have 28% of children that are not completing high school. There are many reasons of that. Lack of resources, bad education. Some of those children join their parents in the search for food. Or children do not go to school because they don't have any food at home. And also, it increased violence. Next slide, please. Of course, this has produced a number of human rights violations, and it's the state obligation to recognize, guarantee, respect, and protect the rights of all persons to enjoy the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. Among those human rights violations, we have the right to life, the right to live with dignity, the right to access information, the right to health care, the right of sexual and reproductive rights of women and men. We also might have some cases of torture and ill treatment, and these also have affected the right of education. Next slide, please. But yes, you might be wondering, how can you help? What can you do to fix or try to help not fix this situation? Next slide. There are a number of NGOs in Venezuela that are doing the work that they can. We have CEPAS, we have Comparte por una Vida, we have Action for Solidarity that treat patients with HIV and other health circumstances. We have Prepara Familia and SECODAP. Those are also two other NGOs that work in the JM Los Rios and with children. So there are many, many ways that you can do to help. You can go to their website, you can ask the Venezuelan community, and I will share all their webpage. And next slide. Also, the very good help that you can do us is share, talk, and raise awareness. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Corina. We're just going to have a few questions and answers, if that's okay. So if you could stay on the line for another 10 minutes, that would be great.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so this is quite an obvious question, but it's also a very good one for those of us who don't know. What happens to the $200 billion in oil money each year? No food, no medicine, where does the oil money go? I don't know if that figure is correct, but you might let us know what the figure is if you know it, and just where do they spend that money?
Oh, are you going to do all the questions or?
We'll do them one by one if that's okay. Is that okay? Or do you want to do them?
Yeah, I think I can take one more question.
Okay, I'll handle this one. How is Facebook Dublin helping the VCI with this social cause? They're helping us today by loaning us this space and supporting us by giving us coffee and tea and drinks and the rest of it. They've been extremely helpful, so we appreciate that help. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, and the AV team down the back. We really appreciate it. The next question, Maria Corina, is who are the South American countries who could be allies to help build new new ties with Venezuela, links to improve Venezuela's external trade routes with the resources they have? So chocolate, oil, rum is what's listed here, vegetables. And finally, then just the last question, taking context of history and civilization, similar atrocities on humans have either been under communist or dictatorship or the colonial government of the kingship, Venezuela might grow into the first democratic failure. Are the citizens considering non-cooperation against the government? Not all, but the stronger ones. That's the question.
Okay, I think I can take care of those 3 questions. When out of the 2 billion, there are 20 billions. And what have they done about it? That's also a very good question that the Venezuelans need to figure it out. Because there is no transparency in the current government. They're not telling where the money is going. And also there's a lot of corruption, and there's a lot of narco-traffic involvement in the current government. So those are 2 options that might lead to those questions that where is the money, and mostly lack of transparency and corruption. Out of the question of what governments in Latin America might help, they have, almost all of them have shown the support to the current humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. The thing is that the Venezuelan government, and you can see it in spaces, in international forums like the Organization of American States, they have publicly denied the crisis, and they are not accepting any possible help from other countries. Nevertheless, for example, I know the case of Brazil that has sent more money, and they are preparing for a possible humanitarian crisis of people that might go from Venezuela to Brazil, and they are adding a little bit more money to their public hospitals or around the areas near to Venezuela. And with the questions, can you repeat the question about the first democratic failure?
So just quickly, it's taking context of the history and civilization. Similar atrocities have happened before. How are the citizens of Venezuela considering non-cooperation with the government? So how are they sort of protesting or not cooperating with the government?
Oh, so the question will be like how Venezuelan citizens are not cooperating with the government. I think it's the other way around. I think it's the Venezuelan government that is not cooperating with their citizens and is not providing health and food to their citizens, not the other way around. That's my personal note on that question.
Just quickly, there's a few other questions. If we might do kind of a speedy round, if that's okay. How long would it take to recover the whole health system with the current oil prices? Best case scenario.
Honestly, I think this will take more than 10 years. I don't think this is something that will recover soon. I think we need time. We need committed persons that are willing to take care of this. And with the current oil prices, I don't see a good scenario here.
Okay. And according to your expertise, what has been the response of international humanitarian organizations, NGOs, and humanitarian people outside of Venezuela? What has been the response?
Well, I have 2 areas. First, NGOs in Venezuela are doing a terrific job in trying to figure out what's going on in Venezuela, giving the numbers, reporting, and sending the information to international communities, international organs. Also, I think there is a very good and high group of Venezuelan community abroad, like the Venezuelan community in Ireland, that have been raising awareness about the subject, that have been raising awareness about what's going on in Venezuela. However, I must say that there is a lot of people that want to help. Nevertheless, the government keeps stopping the help that comes from chiefs and government. The government does not want to receive aid, and this makes it very difficult to send help to Venezuela.
Okay, and this leads me directly into the next question, actually. How can the rest of the Latin American community living in Europe help? So you already said about we'll share the NGOs you've spoken about, but what else can they do? We can raise awareness, we can assist those NGOs. Is there anything else the Latin American community can do?
Well, as I said before, there are a lot of NGOs that are over there in Venezuela that are receiving help. And when I talk about help, is economic help. But there are some other ways, as I told you, share, raise awareness, talk to some persons that of your government if you have the possibility to do so, and talk about what's going on, talk about the numbers of children that are dying, talk about the numbers of women that do not have access to sexual and reproductive rights. And that will make more helpful that in the time being we can receive more help if the international community is aware of the problem that we're facing.
Okay, brilliant. And the next question is, how can we help if sending medicine, food, or other kinds of items needed? So basically, if these items are being blocked, is there, I suppose, again, it's those NGOs, but is there ways of sending anything into the country at present?
Well, I have read about some people in Mexico, for example, that send medicines through Venezuelans or some friends that are going to Venezuela, and this will, it's a minimum help because, of course, in a luggage, you cannot send enough medicines, but it's a way of doing. Like if you don't want to send money, I think the safest way is you to send direct money to the NGO in Venezuela, and the Venezuelan NGO can then try to figure it out how to buy food. There's Action for Solidarity that does a great work, and they have received a lot of medicines and they have distributed it. There is Comparte por una Vida that's also given money that you can go on to GoFundMe, and then you can send money through there.
Again, we'll share some stuff about that after. The VCI team has actually successfully sent both boxes of medicine, and we are shortly sending funds raised from a Venezuelan Family Day. So that's going to happen shortly. So VCI can also help anyone who's interested in doing that. Just for us ignorant Irish people in the room, this is a good question. Can you outline the current political situation in Venezuela? Because we haven't really covered that off yet. What political parties are in place and who the current leaders is, opposition, etc.
I think for that question, I will leave you to Francisco Marquez, who's going to talk about it.
Okay, we'll keep that one for later then. If everyone could give a very big round of applause, that was absolutely excellent.
Thank you.
Maria Corina. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to, we're going to see another video now about the human rights violations in Venezuela during the protests. So it's just a short introductory video. Thank you.
These days, 22-year-old medical student Daniela Liendo doesn't leave home without receiving her anxious mother's blessing, as though she were going off to battle. And in a way, that's exactly what she's doing. And she goes off to join an anti-government demonstration, but not as a protester.
This is all I am carrying: gauze, eye drops, tools of a first aid kit.
She is one of the directors of the Green Helmets, a volunteer first aid organization started by Venezuelan medical students to treat hundreds of people overcome by tear gas or worse. Like the protester who was run over by an armored riot police vehicle last week. The Green Helmets stabilized him and took him to hospital, where he is still in critical condition.
We said to ourselves, we are studying to save lives and people out there really need us. So we decided to form the group. We are there to treat people without distinction, including police. Although we are usually deployed where the protesters are, because that is where we find the majority of people wounded or overcome by tear gas.
But even in this, there is no neutrality anymore. Venezuela's Green Helmets are already being painted as the enemy. In fact, in one of the most widely seen pro-government opinion shows, they were labeled or compared to Syria's White Helmets and called terrorists posing as doctors. Shortly after rescuing the protester who was run over by the armored vehicle, a Green Helmets team and their car, used as an ambulance, was attacked by riot police, as seen clearly in these images.
A group of 20 motorcycled police surrounded us. One of them tried to cut our tires with an ice pick, and when I tried to intervene, he hit me in the chest with a tear gas gun, while another one fired tear gas under the car and 2 more canisters into the vehicle.
Ricardo's father, who drove the vehicle, tells us police also attacked a doctor and a bystander, whom he rushed to hospital along with his son.
How is it possible that they drag a female doctor by the hair and shoot a peaceful civilian at close range with a pellet gun just to taunt us, saying, "There, now you have someone to treat"?
Daniela and the other green helmets concede they're more frightened to go out than they used to be a month ago. But not frightened enough to stop them from rushing into yet another potential battleground, armed with only their bandages and the support of at least one side of this increasingly dangerous and deadly political conflict. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Caracas.
So I think from that you can see the extent of the protests. We're nearing 100 days of protests in Venezuela, so it's quite distinctly difficult situation on the ground. I'm just going to introduce our next speaker, Francisco Marquez Lara. I'm just going to say a bit about him and then we'll have him speak, and then there'll again be a Q&A session. Francisco Marquez Lara is a Venezuelan lawyer and political activist. He was a political prisoner for 4 months and was forced into exile in the US by the Venezuelan government. Before his imprisonment in June 2016, he was the chief of staff of the mayor of El Hatillo in Caracas, starting in 2014 and working with the lieutenant governor of the state of Miranda in 2013. He obtained his law degree in the Catholic University Andrés Bello in 2009 and his master's in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School in 2012. He is currently the executive director of Visión Democrática Foundation, based in Washington, D.C. So please give a warm welcome to Francisco Marquez Lara.
Hello, thank you for having me. A special thank you to VCI and Facebook. It is exactly these type of events that we're looking for in different parts of the world to talk about Venezuela, and we hope that after coming out today, you will feel that more informed about Venezuela and more informed about different ways to help. My first slide, as you can say, is 95 days of protests in Venezuela, and I'd like to put a little bit of political context because I'm going to specifically, deep dive into the type of human rights violations we have seen during the protests. But the context is important. And I always like to quote one of the most prominent human rights NGOs in Venezuela called Provea. They have called what's going on in Venezuela the first civil rebellion of the 21st century. And they name very specific reasons why this is the case. First, because of the length. As you can see, 95 straight days of protest is a long time, especially by historical standards in Venezuela. The last time that we had seen something of this nature was in 1958 when Pérez Jiménez, a military dictator, was ousted, and it wasn't for this long. Also, the geographical extension of the protest. In the 24 states, you see different types of protests take place on a daily basis. The other criteria is the intensity. Since we're talking about the month of April, we see an average of 26 protests every day. And this has been constant. Lastly, the repression that has been executed by the government has not been able to squelch the type of protest that you see. As you can see, you see basically 1 or 2 deaths on a daily basis, thousands of arrests and thousands of injuries, as you can see in the video that was mentioned. And this still protests have not been able to be squelched. And lastly, the context of a dictatorship or non-democratic regime. And this is also very important. In this, I'd like to go a little bit of detail. Luis Almagro, the Secretary General of OAS, I think also says it in a very interesting way. He says, in Venezuela, the way to understand what's going on is that there's no really ways for citizens to make their rights implemented. citizens don't have any recourse or institutions to go to make their rights implemented. And this is what happens in a country where all institutional means or all institutional ways are closed. You see thousands and millions of people on the streets on a daily basis because of what's going on in the situation. So it's not just the humanitarian situation Maria Corina just talked about, not just the economical situation, but also the political situation. And there are a couple of data points that's very important for people abroad to understand. Is first, in 2016, according to the Constitution, we should have had governor elections. Those simply did not take place. Also in 2016, according to the Constitution, we should have been able to have a national referendum to revoke the mandate of Maduro. The election did not take place. It was blocked unconstitutionally by different courts. It was a maneuver by the government. And also in 2017, this year, we were supposed to have mayoralty elections. Those did not take place. So it's just what Venezuelans are really fighting for is their chance, their opportunity to express what they feel and choose their governors. It's nothing that any citizen in any democratic society wouldn't ask for. So this is also very important. And lastly, what's going on right now, and the only, I say semi-election that the government wants to take place is the creation of a national constitutional assembly. This is something that we have in Venezuela. This exists in the Constitution, but the way the government is doing is completely out of what's in our Constitution. I don't want to get too much into it, but it's very simple in the sense that our Constitution clearly states that if we want to change it in any way, shape, or form, especially in the way that the government is doing, is you need to ask the people first to do it. Maduro simply and the government decided not to do it, and they're trying to impose the creation of a new constitution that is trying to redraw completely the states. And this is very important. You see in every different parts of the process that people aren't being asked to vote in a free, fair, open, and universal election. So that political context is extremely important when you see the human rights violations you're about to see. If you could put the next slide, please. So I always like to start with Article 68 of our Constitution, that you will see how precise it is, and you will see the following images that clearly shows you how the National Guard, the state institutions are not respecting this article in our Constitution. It says citizens have the right to demonstrate peacefully and without arms, without other requirements as prescribed by law. The use of firearms and toxic substances to control peaceful demonstrations is prohibited. The law shall regulate the conduct of police and security bodies in the control of public order. If you could look at next slide, please. So as you can see, this is a very close range shot. Unfortunately, one of the young demonstrators that was murdered just recently. Unfortunately, the figures keep rising. He was shot in incredibly close range. In that specific shot, they used what we call metal round object. It's not precisely a bullet, but it's a metal round object hard enough to penetrate the body and kill. His life was gone within the next 2 hours. And this is a clear demonstration. And next I will show video, and as you look at it, you will see that as protesters go near the National Guard, this National Guards take out his handgun and pistol and directly shoots into the crowd. And that day, 2 other Venezuelans were murdered within the demonstrations. So if you could put the next slide, please.
Conocer, según informaciones que aparecen en las redes sociales, que la unidad del Servicio del Cuerpo de Investigaciones Penales y Criminalísticas estaría dispuesta en la Clínica El Ávila para sacar de allí el cuerpo de este joven de 17 años. Lo que no hemos tenido noticias es de si la familia ya ha llegado a la Clínica El Ávila o al menos las personas con las que este pequeño estaba manifestando la tarde de hoy. Se espera pues que luego de que esta unidad ya haya arribado a la Clínica El Ávila sea trasladado el cuerpo de este joven de 17 años a la morgue de Bellomonte para las futuras investigaciones y lo que tiene que ver por supuesto con la autopsia de rigor, como ya se ha realizado con el resto de las muertes de los jóvenes.
Next slide, please. So what you just saw are two different events. One, as I mentioned, National Guard shooting his handgun directly into the crowd, and another video of what I can at least count 50 to 60 National Guardsmen beating almost a life out of a young protester who is by himself. And I'd really like to point out, these are all only the videos that have been able to capture. This is on a daily basis in Venezuela, nationwide. That's why, as you will see in the last slide, when I talk about some of the figures, we have over 15,000 injured in 95 days. So you can imagine the magnitude of, and the scope and the sheer scale of this. And the last video I will show, because I think images and visuals are important, is what the president has to say, our president has to say about everything that's going on, and how he feels that the government should respond. If you could put the next slide, please.
Y aspiro que el mundo escuche después de 90 días de violencia, de destrucción y de muerte. Si Venezuela fuera sumida en el caos y la violencia y fuera destruida la revolución bolivariana, nosotros iríamos al combate. Nosotros jamás nos rendiríamos. Y lo que no se pudo con los votos, lo haríamos con las armas. Liberaríamos nuestra patria con las armas.
So again, we would free our nation with weapons. What we cannot do with votes, we will do with weapons. And this is exactly the mentality, and this is exactly how the government has acted throughout the last 95 days and before as well. So these are not just words, these are actions that the state is putting into place. As you can see, these words have consequences on the daily lives of our protesters. If you could put the next slide, please. Like I said, unfortunately, in terms of the statistics that come in, you have to basically every day put in more and more deaths and injuries. I put 88, but as of today, and this was just hours ago, the Prosecutor General gave a press conference. She mentioned there has been 90 deaths in protests. To give you a good idea of how these deaths are, so 11 of them are people who are underage. So we have a lot of the young protesters being murdered. Most of them are men, only 6 women. But I think it's of note, and this is part of the modus operandi of what's going on right now, is that most of the murders are done by weapons, armed guns, or these are bullets. At least most of the deaths are caused by bullets. Now this is important because they're not necessarily beatings or they're not accidental deaths. When you have these bullets that go through these protesters' bodies, when you have these type of injuries, they're meant to cause harm, they are meant to cause death. This goes with what the government has been saying a long time, that this is an armed revolution, but a peaceful revolution. They have confessed a long time ago that they've been arming what we call colectivos. These are government armed groups or militias, and they are constant in all these protests. There are many videos. This is very well documented how these groups are armed and paid by the government. And one of the ways that they do, these are not just National Guardsmen that obviously murder these protesters, but these government armed militias. That's why you see at least 63 out of the 88, at least this was a couple days ago, have been killed by weapons. 3 of them by what we call gas bombs, the canisters. So a lot of a lot of the deaths, or especially injuries that occur, is that the police guard, the National Police Guard, or either policemen, they're meant to shoot the gas canisters into the air. That should be the appropriate or the normal way to disperse protests if you feel they get out of hand. But there are countless videos and photographs of shooting these canisters in a straight line to cause harm or death. Another aspect is, and this is very unfortunately, some of these protesters have been run over. So a lot of the ways that these protests occur, sometimes they block roads, or they protest peacefully in different areas, and certain cars associated to different government groups have run over demonstrators, as you can see. I put the figure of 15,000 wounded plus. This goes up on a daily basis. This is a very difficult figure to wrap your head around, just because it's also very hard to keep tabs on it. Again, it's in 24 states, millions of people protesting for the last 95 days. So this figure only goes up. I also put the figure of 383 political prisoners. But again, it's all about context. The government sometimes plays with the numbers in the sense that you have 383 or so, again, going up every day, of political prisoners who are currently in jail. But over the last 90 days, again, this is the official statistic of the prosecutor general, there have been 4,658 people processed. So more arrests, but of the thousands of arrests that have taken place, 4,658 have been processed. That is to say, people who have not necessarily been put in jail, but they have different actions against them. So they have prohibitions to leave the country. They have to report to a tribunal every week or every 2 weeks. They have prohibitions to leave certain geographical areas. So that 383 figure can seem very, I guess, out of context, but it's important to see what's going on. So lastly, just to wrap up on a couple important figures, and the other major characteristics of a dictatorship, and you see in Venezuela, is first, a lot of the people that have been processed have been processed by civilians in military tribunals. And this is occurring right now because the prosecutor general has been a lot more critical of the government and of the National Constitutional Assembly. The government's using military tribunals to try civilians. Also, one thing that's not talked about very often is torture. There have been over 300 cases of torture of political prisoners since 2014. And lastly, one of the things that is also not known about is about 20% of the political prisoners actually have court release orders. That is to say, judges have decided that there's no evidence against them. There's some judges who have decided to be independent, and these people who have court release orders in their name are still currently in prison. Most of them concentrated in the intelligence police prison in Caracas, in Nicoya. If you can put the last slide. So again, that's a picture of me in the yellow jumpsuit of me and my friend Gabriel San Miguel. That was about June of last year, almost a year ago. I am right now exiled in the sea. As I always say, I'm one of the lucky ones because I get to talk to you guys and talk a little bit about what's going on in Venezuela. I can personally attest, so when I talk about torture, I personally witnessed torture on a very regular basis throughout my imprisonment. I was actually in 4 different prisons, 7 different cells. I shared cells both with common prisoners and political prisoners. So this is not just a statistic. I can personally attest to seeing this in terms of the conditions of political prisoners, what it's like for a government to try to humiliate you, take away your humanity, what it's like for a government to really make the life of your family a living hell. You know, when we talk about the figure of 383 political prisoners, these are 383 families that are going through this. and again, this is what's going on in Venezuela. One of the things that really impacted me through when I was living through this is how the word I'm looking for is how strong or how determined a lot of the people who are political prisoners, how strong they are in dealing with what's going on. And so these are the people that I think about on a daily basis when we try to spread the word out. I know I have a limit of time, and I'll leave some to questions, but if there's one thought I'd really like to end with you here is when you hear about Venezuela, when you hear about all these statistics about what's going on, and when you see Venezuelans out in Ireland or different parts of Europe, keep in mind that almost every Venezuelan that's outside has a story, has a family member going through tough situation, has perhaps a specific reason why he's outside of his own country. We are a country that has not had a huge history of emigration, of leaving. It's only recently we have about 2.5 million Venezuelans abroad. And I think our biggest challenge, at least that's a challenge of my foundation, Visión Democrática, and what I decided to do after living through what I lived through is how do we use the talent of those 2.5 million Venezuelans to help in the reconstruction of Venezuela? And I believe that one of those paradoxes of life that out of a lot of suffering, out of a lot of things that are a real crisis, like having huge brain drain in Venezuela or going through a political prisoner or having bad experiences happen, is that a lot of these times there's huge potential and opportunity. And I personally believe that this crisis in Venezuela will help the world understand and learn about our country and hopefully play a big role, both the Venezuelans abroad and people abroad in the reconstruction of our country. So thank you for your time and looking forward to your questions.
Okay, so there's quite a number of questions to get through, so perhaps we'll just try and take them quite quickly. This question has two parts. Are the numbers and data that you're using and being recorded by international NGOs, that I assume that's the source of all your information, international NGOs, that data you have?
So first of all, and this is an important question regarding the figures, I like to be conservative because you see a lot of figures thrown out. So when I use the 90, the most hard figures regarding deaths or arrests, the source is the Prosecutor General's office. Regarding injured or political prisoners, those are the sources of Foro Penal, local and other local NGOs, because those are the only ones that provide any sort of statistics, and they're based on their own information because they treat a lot of these cases.
And the second part of that question was whether the recording of that data, will it in any instance help international organizations or bodies to charge people or organizations in Venezuela with crimes?
Well, the hope is that the whole documentation of this within the context of a transitional justice, which I think is very important when things change in Venezuela, I think is going to be key to bringing justice to those who have caused these perpetrations.
So someone's asking whether civil disobedience is the only way out, or is the possibility of international help or action the way out? Which do you see as the direction?
I think they're complementary. I think Venezuelans have given their heart and soul in the last 95 days. Venezuelans will be the ones that reach a solution, but you need international help. And I think the European Union there is key. For those who have been following the European stance on Venezuela, I think Tahani, the president of the European Parliament, has had very strong opinions. But recently, I think that there can be more done, specifically in using their area of influence to influence Caribbean countries in their votes in the OAS. The Caribbean countries have been very wishy-washy or have been wavering in supporting the democracy in Venezuela. So I think that specifically the European Union can do. And lastly, and I'm very responsible about this word, targeted sanctions. As you might be aware of, our vice president has a targeted sanction for drug trafficking. Over $3 billion worth of assets has been basically, frozen. And so those targeted sanctions to these people who are either in drug trafficking or human rights violators does send a strong message and divides different factions of Chavismo and the government, which is very important to have a democratic transition, which is what we're looking for.
Okay, next question, and it's a very difficult one. It's actually horrible. 90 people have died in the streets of Venezuela over 95 days of protest. Has it been worthwhile, and is it worthwhile to continue to protest?
So personally, there's stuff that I saw throughout my jail that I don't talk about, and there's things that I personally lived through. I've also had close friends been killed, and I have close friends right now in jail, and I can really only speak for myself. I think every Venezuelan makes that decision on a daily basis, and after 95 days and 90 deaths, if people are still on the street, I think that decision has been made. But think about it this way: what would you do for your home, to keep your home, to make sure that you fight for your country? What would you do for that? And I think Venezuelans show that on a daily basis. And I think right now that's why the international support is key in understanding that Venezuelans are giving it the all, but we're fighting against a dictatorship that uses drug trafficking and oil to finance their dictatorship. So if you view it that way, you definitely need the help of the international community.
So the next question is about the current government's allies. Who is arming the government? Who's assisting the government? You mentioned the Caribbean islands, but who else is on sort of the current Venezuelan government side in an international context?
Yeah. So internationally speaking, there are two, Russia and China. They have been financing most of the government's activities. Russia is the biggest exporter of arms to Venezuela. I think over 2 years ago, a $12 billion factory started to be built to make Kalashnikovs. So Russia is a huge responsible for this. And the Caribbeans give them political support, especially with Cuba and their area of influence. So these countries are the ones that still have had a more timid approach. And I think what we really need is our allies also to step up, knowing that July 30th right now, and I keep this date in mind, is the date that supposedly the National Constitutional Assembly is going to be chosen through a completely illegitimate, unconstitutional process. And we need countries, presidents specifically, and to step up and say that they're not going to accept this process because all Venezuelans are against it, and it's unconstitutional. So specifically speaking, like I said, not to veer too much, Russia, China, and Cuba are the ones that are most allies of Venezuela, and we need democratic countries to really step up and be more forceful in their arguments.
So the next question is, what has been the response from the UN in relation to the Article 3 violations occurring in Venezuela? So you might just quickly reference what is Article 3 in the UN and then what the response has been.
So are they talking about Article 3 of the Charter? I imagine that's what they're talking about.
The right to life.
Okay. The UN response, they've had a couple organizations. So the Human Rights Council has stepped up. The rapporteurs specifically have been giving a lot of information. But I think in terms of the Security Council or the General Assembly, the politics is very difficult. And I really wish, especially the Secretary General of the UN, I think could definitely be more voiceful in that regard. And if anybody has any ideas how to do that, I'm more than happy to engage.
Next question is quite a personal one. How were you treated as a political prisoner? What happened while you were there?
Yeah, so I was in prison for 4 months, 121 days. And so I received all sorts of treatment in terms of, not being able to see sunlight, limited access to lawyers, isolated from my family, underfed. During those times, I got dengue fever just because of the conditions were so hideous. The best way I can think about it, just imagine being in a dungeon where you can't leave very often. Also, I witnessed tortured I wasn't physically, personally tortured, but there were torture sessions that were done in front of me. I view it as a way to sort of either try to psychologically affect me or try to threaten me. So, one of the torture sessions lasted for about half an hour, and I saw how 6 men would, used their military boots just to beat the heck and crush one of the prisoners who was handcuffed to a fence. And this was for 30 minutes. I always say that the worst part of witnessing torture is not necessarily what you see, but what you hear. And so I was definitely, you could formally regard my experience as inhumane treatment. And so yeah, I only saw a small slice of what other people have lived through. I've met prisoners who lost their eyesight because of torture, prisoners who were raped by intelligence police officers. I saw people whose ribs were broken, all sorts of things, gunshot wounds. So I really could go on and on about all the different types or things I witnessed, but I always insist I'm one of the lucky ones. People have been years in jail or have suffered even worse, both psychological and physical torture.
That's all we have time for, but if everyone could give Francisco Marquez a huge round of applause and thank you. There was a huge amount of questions, so I just tried to give it as much variety as possible. So if anyone felt their question wasn't answered, please maybe email VCI and we'll see if we can help in answering it. Finally, we'd like to welcome Angelisa Zerpa, who is going to give us some closing remarks. Angelisa is a lawyer from Andrés Bello Catholic University. She has a master's in law and international human rights law, and is currently working on New Communities Partnership, a migrant-led organization promoting migrant integration and inclusion in Ireland. So please welcome Angelisa. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here in our first conference. First of all, I would like to thank again our guest speakers for the informative presentation and explanation they delivered for us today. It is not easy to summarize all the information and data and the topics that are currently going on in Venezuela and explain it from a very, very professional and objective point of view. I also want to thank Facebook for facilitating the venue, and especially to Rebecca Roden for being the point of contact and helping us with all the logistics. We really appreciate it, Rebecca. And I would also like to thank my wonderful VCI team, because you guys inspire me every day. All the work, the passion, and all the commitment that you put into every project we undertake is amazing. Thank you for that. And remember that this is for Venezuela. The idea of organizing this conference came from the feeling of frustration. It is not easy to realize what is going on in Venezuela through social media, or even worse, from the testimonials of our families and friends who are still living there. We wake up every day with the fear of checking our phones because we don't want to hear worse news than the one that we received the day before. And we are here living a double life. We work, we study, we smile, we talk here, but our minds, our hearts, and everything is back there in Venezuela, our home. Due to the informative blackout that is happening in Venezuela, and I'm sorry that I'm very emotional right now because after all we thought today, due to the informative blackout in Venezuela, the news explaining the situation are not many. And we felt the need to inform people what is going on here in Ireland. We wanted to put Ireland's eyes on us and to explain why Venezuelans are claiming for help, why we need all to take actions to see and to support people that are suffering back there. I always said this, I always repeat this. We are on a point where it's not about politics. It is not about ideologies. It is not about left wing or right wing. It's about humanity. It's about human rights. It's about the people who are there being killed or who are dying because they cannot find basic medicines. It's about the people who are living in hunger, and it's about the people who don't feel safe in their own country. It is very important to remember that we don't learn all of this from a book or from a report and from the news. We faced the beginning of this situation a few years ago when we were still living there, because the migration of Venezuelans in Ireland is quite new. And I can promise you that most of us has only 4 years living here. So we experienced the beginning of this situation. But now our families and our friends are facing the full crisis on a daily basis. So I think to undermine or to deny or to disregard the facts that have been presented here today is a disrespect for them, for us, and for a whole country that is suffering from this heartbreaking situation. What you saw and learned today here is a reality. It's a painful, cruel, and horrible reality. It is very disheartening for us and difficult topic to discuss. But we are here to put Ireland's side on us, as I said, and we want people to understand why we need your help, why we need to move on. However, after all of this, I can imagine if you all have a horrible picture of what my country looks like. And even though we want people to understand what is happening and to raise awareness what is going on in Venezuela, I want you to understand that this is a chapter. This is a period. This is a chapter in our history book. It's a stage, it's a circumstance. But this is not Venezuela. That's not how we are or who we are as a country or as people. Venezuela is wonderful landscapes, as you can see here. Venezuela is the people who smile at you without even knowing you. Venezuelans are the ones who can become your best friends after 5 minutes of knowing you. And I'm sure that if you have a Venezuelan friend, you know what I'm talking about. Venezuelans are the ones who help each other without expecting anything in return. Venezuela is the people that are sitting here today that even though they know every little aspect of what is going on in the country, they still come, they still care, they're still trying to support. That is Venezuela. And I want to thank you, all of you, for the bottom of my heart, because you still care. You're still here trying to support the country and your people. I also want to thank the people who are sitting here today, and this is not your country. You are very important in this story. Because to be able to see you here, to be able to listen to what is happening, to be able to spread the word, to be able to share the information, you cannot imagine how much we appreciate it and how important it is for us. So thank you very much from the bottom of our heart again for being here. And please share the news. Please be the voice of a Venezuela that doesn't have a voice. We need you. And finally, I just want to say that in 50 years from now, when I'm sitting under a palm tree in the most beautiful country in the world talking to my grandkids about the stories of my past, I will remember this moment. I will remember all of you that are here and who care and who want to help us. But mostly, I will remember those people that you saw on the video, and most of them that you didn't see, that are fighting and who have risked their life and are still risking their life because they still believe in a better country. On behalf of Venezuelan community in Ireland, I want to thank you. Muchas gracias for being here.